الحمد لله رب العالمين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Inshallah, today we're going to discuss the ayat that were recited from Surah Al-Anbiya, from the ayah number 1 during Salat al-Isha until all the way the verse number 72. And that chapter is chapter 21. Again, it's a chapter 21, Surah Al-Anbiya, or the Prophets. That's the name of the chapter, from the beginning, from verse number 1 all the way to verse number 72. And the themes in these ayat are plenty, as usually we know in the Qur'an, and we cannot summarize 72 verses in the Qur'an in 15 minutes. That's why we pick and choose some of the themes in that chapter, chapter 21, and then we will cover that theme and we reflect in it, and that's it, we go on. It's not necessarily a tafsir, it's mostly a themes and the reflection in some of the ayat. And the theme number 1 from these ayat is the theme or the idea about the day of judgment. In the verses from number 1 to number 5, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks in the Qur'an about the concept of the day of judgment is always close and approaching, but many people are not even aware of it. When he says اقترب للناس حسابهم وهم في غفلة معرضون ما يأتيهم من ذكر من ربهم محدث إلا استمعوه وهم يلعبون لاهية قلوبهم وأسر النجوى. Which means that the time of the people's judgment has drawn near, yet they are heedless, trying or turning away. Whatever new reminder comes to them from their Lord, they only listen to it jokingly. لاهية قلوبهم وأسر النجوى الذين ظلموا هل هذا إلا بشر مثلكم أفتأتون السحر وأنتم تبصرون. And then Allah says that the evildoers would converse secretly, saying, if this one, means the Prophet ﷺ, not human like ourselves, why a human like ourselves will come and teach us what to do? The idea of arrogance. Would you fall for this witchcraft? They even call the Prophet's message as a witchcraft, even though you can clearly see. So that theme, my brothers, is addressing everyone. Don't think yourself can be excluded from that theme. Why? Because that theme is addressing the idea that you do not think or you do not act that the day of judgment is approaching. And we have 2 days of judgments. Some people are confused by that. We have an individual day of judgment and we have the great day of judgment. The individual day of judgment is the second you die. That's your day of judgment, you're done. يقول صلى الله عليه وسلم من مات فقد قامت قيامته. Whoever dies, that's their own day of judgment. وإذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله. Once the person dies, their own deeds in their world are cut off, except 3 exceptions. The exception of knowledge that the people are learning from, or the exception of children that are praying for you, or the exception of a sadaqah jariyah, a continuous sadaqah or continuous charity that's still benefiting humanity after your death. That's the only 3 options that are going to be a big investment for you after your death. But many people have no idea that the day of judgment comes. And many people read the Qur'an, recite the Qur'an, having no idea that, or they do not act that the day of judgment is coming. And the concept of the day of judgment is the core of Islam. Why? Because if there's no day of judgment, there's no accountability. If there's no day of judgment, you can do whatever the heck you want in your life and there's no one who's going to judge you. If there's no day of judgment, that means you are created for no reason. If there's no day of judgment, that means you can do whatever the heck you want. You can hide wherever you want. You can be a hypocrite, you can destroy, you can disrupt, you can do anything, and there is nothing called going to be a judgment to you. And the day of judgment, another name for it, is called Al-Yawm Al-Akhir. And this is the last day in terms that the time will plays a role. We know that our day is 24 hours, our year is 365 days, our hour is 60 seconds, so we have a concept of time. The day of judgment is the last day when the concept of time plays a part, which is 50,000 years of what we count. The one day is equaling 50,000 years of what we count. That's 5 times the history of civilization since the beginning of the civilizations, the oldest civilization that we can see. Maybe if we're generous enough, we can see 10,000 years old. Okay, so that's theme number 1. Theme number 1, the day of judgment is approaching, but many of us are not even conscious about it. And the reminder of this is you need to be conscious that there's going to be a day you are accountable for every action that you do. You're accountable for every intention that you have in your heart. You're accountable for every word that is uttered from your mouth. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, there are so many things. I cannot cover all of them, but I will just discuss a half verse. But this half verse is huge in our lifestyle. What is that verse? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمَا آلِهَةٌ. It's verse number 22 in that chapter. لَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمَا آلِهَةٌ إِلَّا اللَّهُ لَفَسَدَتَا فَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَرْشِ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ لَا يُسْأَلُ. And pay attention to that. لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. 6 words. لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. This, once you believe in that verse very well, very deep, your life becomes really comfortable. Why? Because He's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How many choices we have done in our life that turn to be out toxic for ourselves? How many prayers that we called for us thinking that this is the benefit for our life and is going to make our dreams come true, and our dreams, once they come true, they become nightmares. How many people that we want to be close to them and they turn to be out horrible people in our lives? How many oftens or how oftens we are actually a test for another person? We can be a test to our spouses, test for our parents, test for our children. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses in that verse, and the thing that I want to point out to is He's not questioned about what He does. Which means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, in that verse, specifically verse 23, He says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not questioned. He cannot be questioned about what He does, but we will all be questioned. Which means that He is the Lord, He is the Creator, He is the Divine, so I cannot question His decisions to me. I will give you an example in our life, just to make it very clearly. I keep praying for years and years and years and years and years to have something happen in my life, and it never happened. Like, I have a friend of mine, he's looking for a spouse for 15 years. 15 years. You talk about 15 years, how many is that? It's almost 6,000 days. And he never got one. And here's a big test. The test here is he's praying istikhara, he's doing istishara, and he's doing all kinds of possible means to get to that level of a lifestyle that he has a family with him. And it never happened. So the question here, is Allah angry with him? Or is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knowing that this is going to be harmful to him? Or is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saving something more precious in Jannah, because la yujad a'za fi Jannah. There's no single person in Jannah. Everybody is going to have a family around them, or is going to have someone that they care about around them. كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم لا أعزب في الجنة. Or is he going to go through, or is he going to be a test to that person that actually causes that person to be damaged in life and the hereafter? Or. There's so many possibilities. But the only thing that we cannot even come closer to is to question Allah's wisdom in that. That's the only thing that we cannot do. Never question Allah's wisdom. Because Allah is all the wise, Allah is all Hakim, Allah is all knowing, Allah al-Alim or al-Alim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Latif, He is the subtle one, He knows the details. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Khabir, He knows all thorough things. So all of this knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He does something to us, that doesn't mean necessarily that He hates us or He's angry at us. That can be multiple ways. Or maybe I can be a person, once I get married, I'm going to be a horrible husband or a horrible wife or whatever. But I'm not saying that do not get married. I'm not saying do not pursue a family. But what I'm saying that even if you are struggling with something that doesn't come true yet, trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I will give you an example, another example. We read yesterday about the story of the Prophet Zakaria, the Maryam, and we read about alayhim salam, and we read about Yahya, and we read about Isa, and we read about the Qur'an, and we read about Al-Khidr, and Musa alayhim salam. I want to give you an example. Do you think that Zakaria, for 80 years, he wasn't praying to Allah to have a child? Because what we have read in the story is the last part. That وَدَخَلَ عَلَيْهَا زَكَرِيَّا الْمِحْرَابَ فَوَجَدَ عِندَهَا رِزْقًا قَالَ يَا مَرْيَمُ أَنَّى لَكِ هَذَا قَالَتْ هُوَ مِنْ عِندِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْزُقُ مَن يَشَاءُ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ هُنَالِكَ دَعَا زَكَرِيَّا رَبَّهُ. That's the last part. But the 80 years of his life, do you think he has never prayed to Allah that he had a child? He prayed. So I want you to imagine, let's say he got married at the age of 20, 25. So he prayed for almost 50 years of his life for a child. Did it happen? No. Allah wanted it to happen at a certain time. Okay? That's number one. Ibrahim alayhi salam. Do you think that Ibrahim for 80 years of his life, he didn't want to have a child? He wanted to have a child. Ibrahim alayhi salam. To the point that his wife سكت وجهها وقالت عجوز عقيم. When the angels came to give them the good news that they're going to have Ishaq alayhi salam, she got shocked. Are you kidding me? Are you saying that I'm old and sterile and my husband is old and I'm having a child? Don't you think that these two or this couple have been praying for years and years and years and Allah chose not to happen? Did they trust Allah? They did. Ayyub alayhi salam for 18 years of sickness, do you think that he wasn't praying? Jonah, Yunus alayhi salam, in the belly of the whale, didn't you think that he has been praying for years, for days? We do not know how long he stayed, but didn't you think that every day for him, to the point when he got out of the whale's stomach, he actually was sick, his skin was kind of has leprosy from not seeing the sun for too long? And the list keeps going on and on. Do you think the Prophet ﷺ for 13 years in Mecca, without seeing any hope in the horizon, he wasn't praying to Allah? Do you think that Allah doesn't accept them, or doesn't accept their dua in that time because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wal-'iyadu billah, is not wise enough? No, Allah is all wise. But Allah makes things happen on the time that works the best for you. ويقول صاحب الحكم الإمام ابن عطاء له السكندري, he said لا يكن تأخر الدعاء سببا في don't make the lateness or the delay of answering your dua a reason for your own yes. سببا داعيا ليأس, to be despaired and disappointed and depressed. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give you in the time He wills, not in the time you will or you want. So, the theme out of this is trust in the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all wise. And whether you know or not, He is all wise. Whether you accept it or not, He is all wise. Whether you're happy with it or not, He's all wise. And if Ibrahim alayhi salam has Ishaq 15 years earlier, he wouldn't have Ismail. Because Ismail and Hajar alayhi salam, or Hajar and her son Ismail, they came in the picture when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided for Ibrahim alayhi salam and his wife Sarah not to have children. So Hajar got married. She got married with Ibrahim alayhi salam. They have Ismail. He took Hajar and Ismail to Mecca. They had Zamzam. They had the establishment of the Kaaba. And look at the course of the history, because Allah didn't want him to have a child in that time. You see, the whole thing is not only my word, it's the whole word. It's the whole universe. It's the whole earth, the whole globe. Ibrahim alayhi salam, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted his father and the people of Babylonian in Iraq back in 1950 something BCE, like almost 4,000 years ago, Ibrahim alayhi salam, if he called his people and listened to him, he wouldn't go to the promised land. He wouldn't go to Al-Ardu Allati Barakna Fiha Lil-Alamin, the land that we blessed it for the world. So, and then there's so many things. So don't narrow down the wisdom of Allah in your own personal life, because the wisdom of Allah is more majestic, more vast. And you see stories in the Qur'an that explain that very beautifully. Yahya alayhi salam that came later, he came, and then he came at the same time of Isa alayhi salam. Maryam, when that lady, or that young woman, or that young lady, she didn't choose any of that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided for her never to get married. She never got married. She never. And Isa alayhi salam, as some narrations say that he's going to get married when he comes back. So he has never been married for 32 years. So, and the stories goes on and on and on. So what I would like to point out here, and I'm sorry for taking too long in that one, but that's a big idea in our lifestyle. If you do not trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enough, that means your own imagination of the world is disrupted, is delusional. And you think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to work according to your plan, and this is a lack of wisdom, lack of intelligence from your side. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans things much bigger than you, even though He cares so much about you. Okay? That's theme number 2. Because at the time I will discuss another one theme, and then we wrap up with this inshallah, is the theme of the cosmos. The theme of the cosmos, we talked about that before, and that's discussed actually in the ayat, starting from the verse number 30 all the way to the verse number 38. And then it goes even more. And the whole theme starts with أولم يروا الذين كفروا أن السماوات والأرض كانتا رتقا ففتقناهما وجعلنا من الماء كل شيء حي أفلا يؤمنون وجعلنا في الأرض رواسي أن تميد بهم وجعلنا فيها فجاجا سبلا لعلهم يهتدون وجعلنا السماء سقفا محفوظا وهم عن آياتها معرضون وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون وما جعلنا لبشر من قبلك الخلد أفإن مت فهم الخالدون كل نفس ذائقة الموت. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us the world around us from the Big Bang theory, from the explosion, and the samawat wal ardi kanata ratqa. And it's beautiful ayah, and here that Allah discusses some scientific things, some cosmos stuff. Allah told us about some cosmos things, like for example in verse number 30 when He says, do the disbelievers not realize that the heavens and the earth were once one mass, then we split them apart? That's the explosion, Big Bang theory. And we created from water every living thing. Didn't you think from water comes every living thing? And didn't you think from water or without water anything is going to survive? No. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Don't they believe? And then Allah says, we placed firm mountains upon the earth so it doesn't shake with them, and we made in it broad pathways so they may find their way, and we have made the sky a well-protected canopy, still they turn away from its signs, and He is the one who created the day and the night, the sun and the moon, each traveling in an orbit. Look at all of these huge cosmos things. Didn't you think the one who created all of that is going to be eligible to question Him? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Zakaria asked him, قَالَ رَبِّ أَنَّ يَكُنِ لِي غُلَامٌ وَكَانَتْ امْرَأَتِي عَاقِرًا وَقَدْ بَلَغْتُ مِنَ الْكِبْرِ. Allah responded, قَالَ كَذَلِكَ قَالَ رَبُّكَ. The angel, this is what your Lord said. That's enough. Maryam, when she asked, قَالَ كَذَلِكَ قَالَ رَبُّكِ. That's what your Lord said. So, with this cosmos, that theme, We need to be humble in front of the creator of all of the universe. And then Allah finished that theme by saying every human being is going to taste death. Taste it in details. And this is why death in itself is a fitna. The last fitna you will ever experience in the life of this world is death. Once you pass it, you're good. Once you can't pass it, that means there's a huge problem coming afterwards. وَنَبْلُوكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ فِتْنَةً. Allah says in that verse specifically what means every soul will taste death, and we test you, all humanity, with good and evil as a trial. Good and evil. Good and evil. As we said before, that the fact that your life is going easy, that doesn't mean that you are on a good footing. That means you might be tested. Be careful. Be conscious. Be aware. Don't take your children as fitna. Don't take your money as fitna. Don't take all of that as a trials, because these things can drag you away from the path of God. And then he said, then to us you will all be returned. And returned. Not going returned. Rerouted. So, these are three themes. There are so many others. I really advise everyone to read this ayat from 1 to 72. But wrapping up the themes again, theme number 1, the Day of Judgment is a core of the belief and is approaching, is close, and His closeness or its closeness to us is relative, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asa an yakuna qariba. Theme number 2, Allah is not questioned about what He does. Allah is the all-wise. Theme number 3 is look in the cosmos around you. It brings you a lot of humbleness and a lot of humility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت نستغفرك